Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission:
to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations,
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Travel forward with us, 300 years into the future, to confront the greatest mystery ever to threaten mankind. We are aboard a huge starship called the Enterprise. This is the return of Captain Kirk.
An alien object of unbelievable destructive power is less than 3 days away from this planet.
Mr. Spock.
I offer my services as science officer.
Dr. McCoy. Scotty. And joining them on their mission, Commander Will Decker and Navigator Ilea.
I'm sorry.
That you left Delta 4? Or that you didn't even say goodbye?
Get us back in impulse power. Full reverse.
Wormhole distortion has overloaded the main power systems. Belay that laser order. Fire torpedoes.
This, then, is the epic journey of the Starship Enterprise, traveling to the outer limits of time and space to challenge a vast, living machine of destruction. The human adventure is just beginning. Star Trek, the motion picture.
A Gene Roddenberry production, a Robert Wise film.
Hello and welcome to the first of the Star Trek Spotlight on M-Wire. I'm your host, Steve Megatron Phillips, and joining me in this adventure is...
Optimus Solo.
Yes, welcome back to M-Wire.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be back.
Yes. And in this episode, yes, we are skipping, and for those of you hearing this are going to be wondering, where the hell did episode 100 go? Well, we're recording it later. It'll be like a lost episode that comes later in the feed, so don't worry about it. It'll come eventually.
Things don't always happen in sequential order when talking about science fiction things.
No, we're going to time travel back to that episode when we have the amount of hosts that I'm looking for that episode. Right. Since it's going to be an overall Trek encompassing episode.
That's
so I'd like to get as many Trek knowledgeable people on it. So starting out this spotlight will be Star Trek The Motion Picture.
Makes sense.
Yes. The very first Star Trek film, which happens to debut in 1979.
I wasn't even born yet.
Neither was I.
I was -2.
I was -7. This was overall the first film based off of the Star Trek, and it was originally going to be planned as Phase 2 in 1977, but Paramount scrapped it and said, nope, let's do a movie. So they took one of the episodes from Phase 2 and actually kind of stretched it out into this film. The episode was originally called In Thy Image.
Right.
Which I did not know until I did research on that, which I found that kind of interesting. And it's also the very first film that Jerry Goldsmith composed the score for and kind of continued until 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Which this kind of sets the tone for later on in this Trek universe. So, getting into it, what is your what do you remember before having watched it recently?
I mean, I remember that there was a big deal as far as, once I started getting into, because I watched a little, my family watched some of the original Star Trek. We would have it on here and there. Never like religiously, but enough to know all the characters and everything. Kind of my first exposure to the franchise before Star Trek Next Generation came on, where we did watch that religiously. And so I just remember learning about this after the fact. Obviously, it existed before I was born, as did the series. But I was exposed to the series first, and I didn't really know about the movies. And then I kind of had an idea that there was movies out there. And I'm sure that this was on at some point in our house. But kind of like what I was talking to you a little bit off air, my exposure to all of the original series movies was in bits and pieces when my brother would be watching it, or when maybe my mom and dad would be watching it. I kind of was fairly young, so I didn't quite get it, or I didn't quite I don't know if I didn't have the attention span or whatever. I just don't remember ever sitting down and watching from beginning to end of any of the Star Trek movies, of the early ones. And so my exposure to this was very much in bits and pieces. I don't think I had really sat down to watch this, uh, paying close attention from beginning to end until getting ready for the show. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in this spotlight, was so I could watch every single Star Trek film from beginning to end, and so I could remember and figure out which ones I'd seen already, which ones I hadn't, kind of get a whole grasp for the entire thing, because I am a big Trek fan. Um, and I wanted to make sure I've seen all of them and understand all of them, and more so sort everything out. Because all my memories, I wouldn't be able to tell you where which movie this memory was from or which movie that memory was from until I'm going to sit down and watch all of these. Um, I've seen parts of them, but I wouldn't be able to straighten it out and piece them all together as far as putting them in the order of which movie is which and all that. So that's why I kind of wanted to be involved in this. So my exposure to the motion picture originally, like I said, was kind of bits and pieces and a little foggy, and that's why I wanted to do this.
Yes, and again, that's why I wanted to have you involved with all of these, because I know you're like the secondary Trek aficionado of the network.
Right, you are the classic. Well, you're all things Trek guru, but you're definitely more of an expert on the classic Trek uh, history, more so than I am. My expertise, I guess, comes with the Next Generation, which I've seen all of those episodes probably 4 to 6 times
Nice.
over my life. But yeah, and I remember getting this. I got the DVD set of all of the original motion pictures. Not this past Christmas, but the one before. It was probably one of the best Christmas presents ever. And then this past Christmas, I got the Blu-ray box set of all the Next Generation movies. So I finally have all of them on a nice little box set. So I'm very excited to start watching through all these.
Now, is it the white box set that has the all 6 films in the?
Yeah, it's the white box set with the blue kind of holographic
Trek emblem on it.
Trek emblem on the front, and then it has the 6 films, and then it has the Captain Summit DVD, the bonus 7 disc.
You have the same one that I do then.
Right. Okay.
I
do like the covers that the films come in.
Yeah.
As far as the way they're designed, with the kind of the more subdued white front with different faces of the different characters, and then just the band across the middle with the movie title. I really think that's cool how they did that with with Kirk and with Bones and with Spock and all the 7 people they picked out, kind of the main, most highlighted casts. So yeah, it's a cool looking box set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that they did a nice job with the new box set. But for art purposes, just to harken back to the olden days, I used the original movie posters.
Right.
For
Yeah,
them.
that makes sense too. Yeah, because there is some classic kind of aesthetic goodness to that. And this set does have some good special features to it too. I know we're not strictly talking about the DVD set here, but I do plan on, as we start going through these, to be watching a lot of the special features and the commentaries before we do the records. I wasn't able to watch the entire commentary on this one. I watched about the first half hour worth of commentary. That's all I had time to do besides watching the film without the commentary on. So in the future, I'm going to try to watch every film twice, once with commentary and once without it, because it is packed with interesting information during the commentary, as well as the special features that are included with each movie.
I know, and it seems like they did a really nice job including all that kind of stuff in these new box sets where they're all remastered for the most part, and they just did really nice with them.
Any science fiction fan, any Star Trek fan should own, one of these, whether you get the DVD or the Blu-ray box sets of these, of all the Star Trek films. It's a must-have as far as your collection goes.
Yes. For me, my initial introduction to Trek, again, my family kind of grew up with it. I grew up on reruns of the original series and The Next Generation as it was debuting on TV during that time. And it was one of those staples that we'd watch every week when it came out. And my mom actually, for my birthday, bought me all 6 Star Trek films.
Nice.
In '92, after Undiscovered Country had came out on VHS, and it was a special 6 tape box set. It's so funny hearing tape, but you put all 6 VHS tapes next to each other, and on the one side, the way that they worked is they would form a picture. So you would have the original movie poster on the front, but then when you looked at the side and they were all next to each other, each film would put together a picture of part of the Enterprise. So when all 6 movies were sitting next to each other on the shelf, you would see the Enterprise in its entirety.
Gotcha.
And
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought so. I kind of wish I still had them, but just for that purpose, even though I couldn't watch them. But the Undiscovered Country was my favorite out of the bunch. This one has always been kind of a weird one for me. While on some regards I like it, other regards I don't. I don't think it's aged very well with time. This is one of those films, though, that I don't remember, or I didn't remember much of from back in the day. I just remember bits and pieces, like at the beginning, and then I remember some slight elements during the middle, and then mostly the end. Growing up until I watched it recently. But so getting into the plot of it, the gist of the story is you have Starfleet monitoring with Epsilon 9, an alien force, and you have the Klingons and their new warships and their new rigid foreheads, which, again, it's completely new, which forever changed the face of Trek with that element. But you have the Enterprise undergoing a major refit. You have Admiral Kirk in Starfleet headquarters going over to the Enterprise. You have a new captain of the Enterprise, which gets demoted because Kirk pulls rank. You get to see a transporter malfunction where it actually kills someone.
Yeah, that was odd.
Yeah, that was kind of strange. You get to start seeing the original cast getting sprinkled back in. They had another Vulcan that was supposed to replace Spock, which was the one that died at the transporter. So they went off without him, and you come to find out that Spock was on Vulcan, and he's heading back to the Enterprise.
Right.
And you have this energy cloud calling itself V'ger, who takes their new Deltan navigator, Ilea, and uses it as a probe itself.
Right.
And then you have the Enterprise and their crew going through V'ger for pretty much the rest of the movie, only to discover that V'ger is scuffed up with grease on it, and it's a satellite from 20th century Earth called Voyager 6. And they compare it to a child throwing a temper tantrum, or Bones does, which is hilarious. And Decker, who was supposed to be the captain of the Enterprise until Kirk demoted him, ended up merging with it, and it kind of implodes, and the Enterprise comes floating out of it.
Basically.
Yes.
It goes to another dimension. Yeah, it's it's good that you mentioned in the opening that this was originally supposed to be the pilot episode for the second television series, because knowing that makes everything make more sense that you saw, in a way, and it's almost like when they made this film. Like, it was almost like we literally got to see in the movie somebody scrapping the idea for this television series. Because you have, originally the television series was supposed to have not just some of the original cast and crew, but it was supposed to have these new characters, the three that we mentioned, the other Vulcan, Commander Decker, and Ilya. Those were supposed to be three new characters to debut in the second television series. Well, obviously we know that the second television series is going to get scrapped, and then why I said it seemed like you're almost watching it in the movie, because you basically see them take care of all of these new characters and get rid of them.
Yeah, and they get rid of them. One of them immediately.
Mm-hmm.
One of them debuts a good quarter of the way into the movie, and then is no longer that character anymore.
Right.
And then you have the other character in the entirety of the movie, and he takes out the other character with himself.
Yeah, so I mean, it's almost like you literally get to see them scrap this idea of a new series right in front of your eyes. And the other reason I think it's important to know that it was kind of technically the pilot episode turned into a movie is because it makes sense as far as the pacing of the film. It's almost very apparent that at least for me, it comes across as an hour story stretched into a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, it almost seems like a two-parter.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like from a pacing standpoint that it's like they didn't necessarily have 2 hours worth of content, but they needed it to be 2 hours to be a movie. So there's a lot of, and I'm not saying it's all bad, but there's a lot of time spent outside of the action. There's a lot of visual, panoramic views and scenery shots, and traveling as not just people outside of the ship, but as the ship is going. There's a lot of time spent without lines being spoken and without action being taken, which I have a feeling for the casual science fiction fan, not science fiction fan, for the casual Trek fan, I guess, or maybe just the casual viewer in today's world, we're so used to fast-paced action. And I'm not saying I like fast-paced action all the time, but I think the casual viewer might find this to be a slow movie, if that's a fair summation of it.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah, just because there are times where even for me, who is a huge science fiction fan and a big Trek fan, even times for me watching this where I felt it was dragging a little bit, and maybe that's just because I've become conditioned to, especially with like all the superhero movies these days, to a movie that is trying to fit so much in that it just seems like it's going. And this one, because it was really only dealing with a pilot television episode worth of content doesn't get that feel. It's not going. It's more, let's stretch this out and really introduce you to this and kind of savor it, where a lot of people might think it's dragging a little bit. But again, that doesn't surprise me, knowing that it was technically a television episode somewhat. I mean, obviously they re-edited it and changed things and whatnot, but basically a television episode stretched out into a movie.
Well, and it kind of makes sense also because you start out and you don't have Kirk, Spock, or McCoy as the core three that they were in the original series. They were originally not on the Enterprise. You know, you had technically the new Vulcan taking over for Spock. You had Ilea kind of in a sense there. You had Chapel taking over for McCoy, and then you had Decker as Kirk's spot. So, basically, because Phase 2 got phased out, they had to bring back what worked. And even despite that, the cast had a lot of pet peeves with this entire film because they didn't feel like it was actually Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple things that, and I'm not saying, I in no way want to make this film come across as a failure, or that I'm ragging on it, because I'm not at all. But I can see that statement being true as far as them feeling like it's not Star Trek, because even as someone who, like, I'm picturing someone that actually grew up watching this series and who was alive when the television series was on, watching it, you know, firsthand, not in rerun or syndication like we got to see it. I kind of imagine them going to see this movie and having a little disconnect. Not just because it had been a number of years since the television series, but it's almost like, basically take something you grew up with, and then almost a decade later, you're going to watch a movie of these characters. Now, number one, they're going to be older, so you're going to have a little disconnect because they're not going to look exactly the same as they did when you were seeing them on television. And now, number two, you're seeing them in all that entails of seeing something in a feature film versus seeing something on a television screen. And there's a lot of differences between movies and TV. I think that gets blurred nowadays because in ways some TV shows are more like movies these days. But back then, you know, there were certain things that you could do and couldn't do in a television series versus a movie, from a visual standpoint, from a lot of different aspects. So now you're seeing it in a completely different medium, as well as seeing it 10 years later, and then with, you know, different characters in some instances, and a number of other things. For me, it was something that was always a disconnect when I saw these movies, and even some that we'll get to as we travel through here, was the difference in uniforms as well. That kind of added to the disconnect for me. Because you're so used to seeing them look a certain way, and when they're in different color or different style uniforms, it makes it feel like it's not the same. And I know there's reasonings for it, and that was a little bit in the commentary that I watched for this film, that you know, they didn't feel that the bright colored uniforms that worked on a TV screen would work in, you know, in the movie, as far as on that type of medium. And so they did change all the uniforms to make them a little more subdued, not as bright, because they felt that would play better on the bigger screen. But it's just the little things like that that kind of add to a disconnect. So I can see why, you know, cast members or fans of the original series would feel that this is not 100% the Trek that they kind of knew and loved at the time. You know, whereas us, we're seeing all this after the fact. You know, for a lot of us, the series already existed, the movies already existed by the time we get to watch them, so we already have associated them as being Trek. But it's like if you were taking whatever television show is current, that you are a big fan of right now, and then 10 years later having a movie, and there's going to be a disconnect with it.
Oh yeah,
it'd be like if they had never done a Star Trek Next Generation film and then they just did one like this year.
Yeah, there would be a huge gap
with the original people, and then they change their color of their uniforms and do stuff like that. We would be like, that doesn't feel the same. So I get that.
Yeah, I and I guess we'll get into that, the technology and the colorizations and everything. It kind of like the colors of their uniforms. It looks like they went for more of a toned down, bland look. And I know a lot of that had to do with Roddenberry, which was a lot of the reason why this film was the way that it was.
Right.
Because I think he had too much of a grasp on it, and they didn't kind of let things kind of go a little bit more naturally.
Right.
And it was kind of sad to see that they did away with the red shirt. They had a kind of a blandish gold shirt, which was kind of, there was no really rhyme or reason of why people wore certain colors.
Yeah, everybody seemed to have a different, like, in the original series and in Next Generation, and I assume in most Star Trek series, your rank or your area of expertise determined what color shirt you had on.
It does in all of them.
Yeah, that's what I figured. But in this movie, it's hard to determine who's what rank, even amongst, like, even Kirk wears a number of different color shirts throughout this, it seems like.
I think he has 3 different uniforms in this entire movie.
Yeah, and just like when you see a picture of the crew or a picture of the bridge, it's hard for me to be like, okay, those 3 are wearing this, because it seems like everybody's in a different outfit, or a different kind of version of the same outfit, I guess. But yeah, it was harder for me to determine who's what rank in what area watching this film compared to if you watch any of the series, you can immediately tell who's who.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but Kirk's Admiral uniform that he starts out in the very beginning of the film, they reused it in Into Darkness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the exact same one that Pike and Marcus wear.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's of course it's updated just ever so slightly on the
the
new film, but it's the same uniform.
Oh, okay.
Which I'll have that published in a article that I'm writing.
Cool.
Of some of the comparisons between this film and some other stuff. But what did you think about the improved Enterprise and bridge?
I liked the Enterprise. I liked the bridge. I wish they would have done more showing, like, there was that scene where Kirk is kind of stumbling through the halls and not really sure which way to go, or how to find where he wants to go. But that was like really just like a hallway scene, and I wish they would have done more to show the inside of the Enterprise a bit more. We get a great view of the outside, the exterior, and how that looks. And you do, just because a lot of the action takes place in the bridge, you do get to see a lot of the bridge. But I almost wish, like, when they were introducing some of the older characters who were coming on the bridge and rejoining up, I don't know if they could have not necessarily taken a tour of the ship, but some way worked in a little bit more where we could have seen a little bit more of what was going on in the inside. But I like the way they did things. I mean, it is completely different. It's much more akin to what you would see in the Next Generation ship as far as the inside goes, compared to the original Enterprise that we saw. I get a lot more feel like it's more similar to the Next Generation Enterprise. But I do like the updates. I like all the ships that I've ever seen for the Enterprise, though, all the different versions.
As do I. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Getting into some of the pros and cons, what are some of your favorite aspects of this film?
I do like we were just kind of talking about, I do like the way that they show the exterior of the Enterprise and how they kind of show it on the outpost there, this space station or whatever you want to call it, before they launch their voyage. I like how they show that. and I think it gave a good sense of the changes in the new version of this Enterprise. I do like that. I like how they worked in getting all of the original cast members in by this way or that way, and not just them coming aboard and joining the movie, but the reasoning why they were needed or the reason that they came aboard, that type of stuff. So I thought it was cool how they worked that in. I like that we get to see the Klingons at the beginning, and I thought it was an interesting way to introduce us to the film, as far as setting the stage for something massive. Because the Klingons at that point are kind of, at that point in Trek history, are kind of seen as the badasses, as one of the worst villains that they could come across, and to see them just easily disappear, I guess, due to this unknown entity. It really does set the stage for something that must be badass, if it's taking out these guys. How I feel about that later, we'll get into. And I did like the sequences on Earth as far as showing the all the different Starfleet individuals, and there was a variety of different types of aliens and people and whatever that you can see when you're kind of scanning that crowd. So I kind of enjoyed that. So those were, and I think the music was great. The music's always great in most Star Trek things, but I really like what Goldsmith does with this film, and I think the music does help a lot, especially those moments where I was talking about where it does seem to drag. At least you do have a good musical score to kind of keep your interest.
Yeah, I too love the score for the film, and much like all other Star Trek films or TV series, I pretty much like anything that comes out of it sound-wise from this point on.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting in this film that James Doohan, Scotty, created the distinctive Klingon vocabulary heard in this film. And then they later had the Mark Okrand develop the Klingon language based on the actors' made-up words.
Right. Which
I found that interesting about that film. I love this revamp of the Enterprise. This is quite possibly one of my favorite versions of the Enterprise. For some reason, I like it because when it adds the A to it, even though it's not really much different other than the bridge and then the letter. But I love this style of the starship better than the original.
I agree.
It just looks more streamlined, and it just looks cooler. And I like the blue accents off of the kind of whitish metal look. I like the aging of Scotty.
Mm-hmm.
He looks pretty much mostly different than anybody else in the film.
Right, for sure.
It kind of added that nice touch to him, which followed him throughout the rest of his Star Trek career.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I love the crotchety moments where McCoy is throwing out his kind of quips about everything.
Yeah.
He's always been one of my favorites of the show.
He had an interesting look when he first got there, too.
Yeah, I know, a scruffy beard, and and then you have Spock showing up in robes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was...
They did a good job of aging Spock, because he literally does... Like, the way they aged him in 1979 to make him look older is how he looks older.
Yeah.
Like, if you literally take him that many years later and just look at Leonard Nimoy, like, they almost, like, did it perfectly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was crazy looking back at it now. I was like, man, I got to keep reminding myself that that's not him today, because it looks like he looks today.
It is actually kind of sad that it does.
Like, they got that right on. I forgot to mention that I did also kind of like, I usually am not a big fan of a lot of new characters when they're introduced to franchises like this, just for a movie or this or that. I know they were supposed to be on the next TV series and whatnot, but I did think they did a decent job. Ilya and Decker, and Stephen Collins. I mean, he's a pretty famous person, the dad from Seventh Heaven. So I definitely recognized him. At the time, you wouldn't, when this movie came out, he probably wasn't that well known. But now, all these years later, later, seeing that movie, immediately I'm like, wow, what's the father from Seventh Heaven doing on Star Trek? But I thought he did a good job in the film.
Yeah, he definitely was one of the few that got a lot of character moments in this film.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I should say I like the cameo for, well, not really cameo, I guess, because it hadn't happened yet. No, he played it in the television series, but Spock's father, Sarek, the same actor that plays him, was the Klingon commander in the opening sequence.
Oh, nice.
So I thought that was pretty cool that they worked him in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the third alien he's played. He started out as a Romulan in the series, then he played Sarek, a Vulcan, and then he plays a Klingon.
He had him covered.
Nice.
How many other people can have that claim to fame?
So they did have the entire original crew in this film.
Yeah.
Because they had Janice Rand, and who disappears until the sixth film again, and then Chapel, who never seen again.
Basically, only heard from after that.
The computer.
Yeah. So it's probably better that way because some of her scenes were a little
forced.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the only reason she got into this film is because Roddenberry was running the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes as the films go on. It's less and less of him and more of outside.
Right.
But we'll get into those when we get into those films later on. But yeah, I definitely liked a lot of those aspects of the film. I liked the bridge improvements. Although I liked the original series one a little bit better than the motion picture bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really start liking the original series film bridge until I think 6.
Gotcha.
Because I find it weird how it changes every film. Even though it's not really a refit, like the first and second film, it's totally different. And then the third film, it's like slightly different than the second film. And then you, of course, have 4, 5, 6, and it's different in every movie, and it's the same Enterprise. But yeah, I'm a little off put on that. But can't really complain too much about the film. I liked the premise of it for the most part. I just think that, like you said, it was a little slow.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess we'll get into our cons about it, and I guess I'll go first. I was a little, I don't know, as a kid, kind of weirded out by Ilea having the glowing dot in her neck, and then talking with some kind of a weird reverb.
Yeah.
On her voice, and something about the whole Vidri thing was kind of creepy, and I know it was very, very, very sci-fi.
That's true.
So I guess that's kind of why it was the way it was, and so I mean, in that instance, I can understand it and appreciate it for what it is. But I kind of found it very weird in a Star Trek film.
Yeah, and I kind of the first time, from some of the first time it was used, I was thrown off a little bit.
Some of the appearances of some of the characters were a little bit weird. I mean, they definitely look 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Namely, like, Chekhov, Uhura.
Right.
Then I think they tried to cram too many characters in this film. Again, they didn't really need Janice Rand or Chapel.
They just...
it was more of a nod and letting them be in it than...
Yeah, there was a lot of characters that just seemed there just so we could see them, and they really served no purpose or didn't get any type of development. The relationships between a lot of the characters were non-existent. So yeah, there was definitely a lack of character development. I mean, I know you're already dealing with established characters, but for me, a lot of the outside of like Spock and Kirk and a couple others, there really wasn't anything for Chekhov or Sulu or, I just don't feel like they got anything worthwhile. And there was 2 hours that they could have had something.
Yeah.
So that was a little disappointing for me because that's one thing that always has been something I liked about all Star Trek things is the interactions between characters and the character development and relationships between different individuals, and to see that, and I thought it was just a little missing in this one.
Yeah, I kind of felt that as well. It seemed like it kind of almost seemed like it was thrown together a little bit too haphazardly, and like they were trying to just get it out more than actually trying to concentrate on making it a logical progression of the original series.
Because really the only characters that you see any relationship or development between are Kirk and Decker. Like that's really the only combination where you really get some back and forth and some feel for, how these two feel for each other, how these two interact with each other, and how that progresses throughout the movie. Outside of that, there's just not a lot of development, and when I say that, I mean from the beginning of the movie or from the first time a character is seen until the end of the movie or the last time a character is seen. There's not a lot of growth for a lot of the relationships between characters except for Kirk and Decker. That's the only one that evolves over the course of the movie.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
So, and I just think with as much time as they had and as much time as they spent with no dialogue, that there could have been instances that they threw more of that in there somehow. And that's some of the complaints that I read from even some of the cast members, that they just didn't feel that some of the characters got enough time. They didn't feel like there was enough characterization or relationship. Even Bones kind of said that, feeling the characters and relationships were not there that made the series successful.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with him on that. That's where it was definitely lacking.
Yeah.
I did find it nice that they went to Vulcan, though.
Yeah, that was cool. That was definitely cool to see a little bit of that. I also think, as one of my cons, that a little bit. Now, I know this was done in the 70s, and I think they did a tremendous job visually for a film done in the late 70s. But, not trying to start a franchise war here, but some of the visual aspects did not hold up compared to another late 70s sci-fi movie. Now, I know they didn't have, some of the stuff that Mr. Lucas had at his disposal, so to speak, but I thought some of the visuals were excellent and some of the visuals did not work. Mainly the ones that I didn't like in this film were a lot of the sequences, especially at the beginning, when they would show either the station or one of the ships from a distance coming at you, or a shuttle or anything that had a window, and then they would show the two people on the other side of that window.
Yeah.
It just looked really fake. And I don't remember seeing any instances of that, of like that in like the original Star Wars. So I don't know what the two what their technique was compared to each other, and why one looked more legit and one looked more fake. But there was a lot of instances like that I kind of saw that looked a little fake. But then there was a lot of really good, especially when you focused on the Enterprise as a ship and its movement, that looked really good visually. So I mean, there was some stuff that hit really well and some stuff that just looked very out of place or fake. So I mean, it was kind of a hit or miss visually for me.
Yeah.
Did you notice when they were on Vulcan that there was moons orbiting it?
No, I didn't even pay attention that close to see that.
And Vulcan, I am correct that Vulcan shouldn't have had any moons, right?
I don't think they did. I know they had a twin sun.
Yeah, I don't think they had moons, but it was kind of something they very briefly touched on in the commentary, that they said, "Oh, look, Vulcan has moons," and I got the impression that was a mistake, that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, I don't think that they did.
The other interesting thing that I got picked up from the commentary just from that first half hour, I don't mean to change subjects too much, but in the original cut, because when they did the scene with Spock and the other Vulcans, they had them literally just read the words in English, and they captured it and then took out the sound and dubbed in the Vulcan. Well, I guess in the original cut, they had to switch all the subtitles around a little bit so it didn't read like they originally read, because otherwise if you had the subtitles on, you could see that the lip movement completely matched the English words that they were saying. So I guess they had to rewrite those lines so that you couldn't pick up on it as easily. I don't know if it existed in any of the other cuts, but I know they said that it existed in the original cut, so I thought that was kind of funny.
That is kind of funny.
Oh, but yeah, my only con, I didn't mean to cut you off, and I'll let you talk about your cons a little bit more since I didn't let you finish. But my only cons, besides a few of those visual aspects that looked fake, was really more almost completely surrounding the pacing of the film. I just really think they could have done stuff to keep the action moving a little bit, throw in more dialogue, throw in more character development, throw in more action as much as you can. I mean, I know there's not a lot of action. There's not like, these big fight sequences or chase sequences, and there's not like there's not the villains aren't necessarily like tangible, as far as like they're not Klingons, they're not Romulans, they're not other humans that you can't battle. So I mean, I know it's kind of dealing with more of you know a villain that's not something you can see and touch, so to speak. But I just think there was something they could have done to make it work, where it felt like it was traveling a little faster and not dragging on. So that was my biggest con from the movie.
Yeah, there were still. I can definitely agree on the pacing aspect of the film. There were several scenes, like when they're going through V'ger, when Spock's floating in his spacesuit. I mean, those scenes just seem to drag.
And the other big scene that dragged for me was just that opening. Not the part where you deal with the Klingons, not the part where you deal with the Vulcans, but in between there, where they're kind of getting the ship ready and they're showing all that stuff. That 15 to 20 minutes, really, as Kirk and Scotty are getting to the Enterprise, that kind of dragged on a little bit for me too.
Yeah, they could have still had a little bit of that and done less of them visually and just kind of dubbed it over them flying to the Enterprise or something.
I mean, I know it was kind of the unveiling of the new Enterprise, and they wanted to have that kind of crescendo and big, build that up a little bit, but it just was, it's like, come on, like, we get it.
But I mean, yeah, that was, I think, pretty much the only problem with it really is just the pacing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the main problem, and I think that's why this film gets such a bad rap. Because honestly, it's not as bad as, I mean, it's not a great Trek film, but it's not terrible. There's still one or two down the line that
are going to be worse.
They're going to be kind of in some ways yes, and in some ways no. But
I think the other reason some people kind of pan this a little bit, or a lot of people have problems with it, is because it's such an abstract villain.
There is no physical face to it.
Right, and it's so abstract to try to wrap especially a non-science fiction fan, to try to wrap your brain around how this all works and how you can kind of like come to terms with what's going on, especially when it's related back to the Voyager NASA craft and that connection. I think a lot of people might have saw that as kind of hokey, and just with the whole robots that are living, or machines that are living, and I think some people will have a hard time kind of grasping that and coming to terms with that. So I think they can just pan stuff like that because it's too abstract for them to deal with. I didn't see that as a huge problem, but I could see a lot of other people kind of harking on that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being the reason why people are kind of.
People need their villain that they can.
Yeah, they need a face to their evil, not.
Yeah.
And you could almost argue that this made contact with the Borg at some point.
Yeah, and they do mention that in a couple of things. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching this, and when I originally saw that this kind of like entity kind of took over the Klingon ship and was heading for Earth, and it was this impending doom. I was like, man, it sure sounds a lot like the Borg, which obviously didn't exist at that point. Didn't come along until later. But but I thought that was a definite thing that anybody nowadays watching it would pick up on and be like, man, that's got a lot of similarities to what they deal with the Borg later. And I can't remember who. I just read something about that connection. I'll have to see if I can remember what they said about that. But there is
Shatner actually wrote Star Trek: The Return, and it takes place after Generations and before First Contact, and it's where the Borg use nanites to revive Kirk.
Oh, okay.
Who died in that. Not going off too much into that. His job, essentially, by the end of that, is to pull a switch on the Borg homeworld, and, which shuts them down, kind of thing. And they have Spock. Somebody from the Borg try and assimilate Spock. And they said, you've already connected with us before. And
being in this film.
Meaning V'ger, when he mind melded.
Oh, okay.
So they couldn't assimilate him because he was already technically part of the collective.
Yeah, because they were saying basically when the Voyager satellite kind of went off and whatever, and it eventually came into contact with this planet of living machines, that planet that he came into contact with was the Borg.
So maybe it transwarped away in this film.
Yeah, so interesting connections that you can kind of draw, I guess.
It could go anywhere, really.
Yeah, as science fiction always can, which is why it's so great.
Yes. So what were some of your memorable moments or quotes of the film?
As far as memorable moments, probably first and foremost was the unveiling, even though it took a while to get there, but the unveiling of the new Enterprise, seeing that in all its glory was pretty cool. I did enjoy that. There was a couple things as far as interactions between Kirk and the new captain, or the captain that he basically shuffles down and demotes immediately. Some dialogue between them and some interactions that I thought were cool. I like the time where Kirk is about to correct him, and then he kind of stops and is like, "You're right. That is your job to give me alternatives and whatnot." So I thought that was kind of interesting. I definitely got a Next Generation feel that I kind of enjoyed when the entity kind of was present on the bridge. Its little standing electrical storm there, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, before it takes over Ilya. Because that reminded me that happened a lot on the Next Generation, where someone would all of a sudden be present on the bridge and would be doing stuff that they couldn't control or that they were trying to deal with. So I liked it when that happened, and I thought it was interesting to see who is it going to attack or who's it going to go after, what's going to happen here. So that was kind of some tense moments, and that's as close as you get to kind of that physical interaction with our antagonist protagonist relationship there. Before it takes over Ilya, so I kind of enjoyed that. And then, of course, when Kirk is having to go down to convince Scotty to come aboard, or not Scotty, excuse me, Bones to use the teleporter and come on board. It's always good seeing Kirk and Bones kind of interact with each other. So those were some of the ones that kind of stood out the most to me. How about you?
I for the most part liked when they reintroduced everybody, kind of thing, and showing off the new Enterprise. I liked again Bones's reintroduction, which was funny because he's giving him a smart ass remark, kind of. He's like, "Just a moment, Captain Sir. I'll explain what happened. You revered Admiral Nagura invoked a little-known, seldom-used reserve activation clause. In simpler language, Captain, they drafted me." Which I found that hilarious. And then he starts right on by complaining, saying that I hear Chapel's an MD now. Well, I'm going to need a top nurse, not a doctor who will argue every way. And then he says, they've probably redesigned the whole sick bay, too. I know engineers, they love to change things.
I also liked his line, "Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?"
I know, I love that. You can never go wrong with a McCoy reference.
Yeah. So, yeah, I definitely thought he had some of the crowning moments as far as quotes go.
Just like when Chekhov goes, "No casualties reported, sir," or doctor, and then McCoy says, "Wrong, Chekhov. There are casualties, my wits." And then he keeps calling him Captain Sir to Kirk, like giving him a slap in the face consistently.
Yeah.
Which I found kind of funny.
No, I agree that those were some funny moments. Like I said, I just wish there was more of those moments. There was more dialogue between them because what they did put in there was decent. So if there was more, it would have been even better.
Yeah, there was just too many quiet parts in the film.
Yeah, too much scenery, not enough characters.
Mm-hmm. One of my other favorite parts is the end when V'ger's arguing with Kirk, and Kirk just simply tells it, "No." And it's like, "You will do it," and he's like, "No." "You'll do what I want first," and it's like, "Fine." And then McCoy, basically says, about it being because Spock calls it a child. And McCoy's like, "What do you suggest we do? Spank it?"
Your child's having a tantrum.
I know. I found that hilarious. It was, I just couldn't help but laugh at that. And it was kind of sad seeing Decker go away.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that he had a possibility for potential to join the crew in some capacity.
Yeah, he definitely had the potential. He had the good interaction. I definitely could have seen him being, a main person going forward. But, if that's, I really think it would have been obviously had they would have had to ended the film a little differently. But had they decided to go forward with the second series, I really could have seen him as like a number one or as like a main character on the bridge. So it's kind of unfortunate they never did that series.
So yeah, some of the minor background information. This was obviously the only Star Trek film in the 70s. Janice Rand.
No other film came out in those last 25 days.
Nope. Janice Rand and Sarek were the only two actors besides the original cast to appear in both the first film of the original series and the last film of the original series. It says Majel Barrett and Leonard Nimoy are the only original series actors to participate in both this film and the latest, or it was the latest at the time, which was the 2009 reboot.
Right.
Nimoy is still the only one, though. She
didn't talk at all in that last movie?
Nope. They didn't have a computer voice in this.
That was too bad. That kind of upsets me because she had been the only person ever to be on every series, and I thought she was in every movie too.
She, I believe, was up until this latest one, the Into Darkness. They didn't.
Should have worked her in somehow.
Yep, and they had, the funny thing was they had somebody doing the voice for the Vengeance.
Yeah.
In Into Darkness, and I don't recall ever hearing the Enterprise computer. They had the Delton.
Gotcha.
Doing a lot of the stuff. So, but yeah. So, not to go off on a tangent of all the different Trek news or information on this film, because there's absolutely a lot of it. What are your more or less?
And I don't want to before people jump down our throats. I don't want it to make us sound like we're ignorant. I didn't mean that they could somehow include her in person, since obviously she's not alive anymore. But what they've done in other stuff is just reuse voice. There's so much dialogue that's already recorded from her that it was more so them being able to use her voice in a way and put it in there somehow.
Or they could almost take all of that and archive it like they did with Roger Ebert, where they made him a vocalizer that he typed into and it would sound just like him.
Right. Yeah. So I mean,
I-
I wasn't trying to make it sound like she could have actually somehow physically been in the film, since that would have been impossible.
Yeah, very impossible. So getting into it, what are your final thoughts of the film overall?
Um, I think it was a tough feat that they were doing. It was something that had never been done before, as far as obviously Star Trek goes. I mean, you had this somewhat successful television series. It had been off the air now for a while, and it was a big risk and a big feat to tackle as far as trying to get this into a motion picture, and to make that work. Um, I think being the first one that they got some stuff right, and they stumbled a bit on other parts. It could have been a better film for sure. It also could have been a disaster that would have resulted in no future Star Trek film, so at least it didn't go that route. So I think you got to take the good with the bad, and there's some growing pains as far as trying to transfer this franchise onto the big screen, which they do get successful, very successful with certain other films that will come as we go through here. So it's a necessary first step. Overall, I mean, if I was trying to give this one a rating, if we were going out of 5, I'd probably land it somewhere in the 3 range. Like a 3-star out of 5. Because I think it does kind of just fall in that middle territory where it's nothing that was phenomenal for me, but it wasn't like the worst thing I've ever seen either. It was you take the good with the bad with this one.
Yeah, I think I kind of have to agree with you there. I think I'd have to also give it a 3 out of 5. Only for the fact that it did revitalize Star Trek, at least to begin with the feature films before it went to more television series. And it did happen to more or less triple its budget of $46 million, and box office it made $139, which in today's age that would be a total bomb, or a quasi bomb, because some films don't even make their money back. But I would definitely say that it did well enough that it garnered to go on to a second film. However, it also showed that despite Roddenberry being the creator and driving force of the series, as subsequent films will show, it was a good thing that they forced him out of creative control. So, yeah, overall, I'd say that it wasn't a total loss. It was definitely innovation in Star Trek and in science fiction and 3D or CGI graphics.
Right.
So, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we've started this, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the other movies again. Some of them maybe for the first time, at least all the way from beginning to end. So I'm interested to see which films I end up liking, which ones I don't like. See if we agree or disagree on any of the other ones. But yeah, for this being the first one, I'll take it for what it is. And like I said, it could have been worse.
Yes, definitely. So join us again. Not sure when we'll have time just for the next episode, so don't hang us. Be sure to leave us feedback. Again, that clip will play at the end of this episode, but you can also reach that either on the website or the forum, or feedback at geekcastradio.com. Always look to see what you guys have to say about it. So, yeah, whenever...
Especially with this being the first one, if you guys want us to touch on certain things in future recordings for the other Trek movies, if you want us to, answer some questions or, do whatever, just let us know as we go through this, especially early on here.
Yeah, definitely. I want to make it as relatable and interactive as possible as we go through, so that, for instance, if you guys have specific memories of each film as it goes through, then go ahead and send it, whether it be voicemail or email, and we'll bring it up and try and touch on those points in the episode.
Stuff you like, stuff you didn't like, whatever.
Yeah,
what you would rate it.
And because possibly we may overlook it.
And the other thing I'm going to do as we go through here is I'm going to kind of do a running ranking. I don't have any preconceived notions of where I would stack all these films up, so I'm going to be ranking them as we go. So right now, this film is in the top spot, and we will see, as we go through, how I change as I insert each film into its appropriate placing.
Yeah, and I'll probably do that as well. And then when we get to, I'm thinking about doing the episode 100 actually after all of the films.
Yeah, that'd be cool too.
Because then we can reveal our total list in that episode, as well as touching on various aspects of the series as well.
Yep.
So definitely want to do that. And as always, we will try to get it out as soon as possible. Just depends on mine and Kevin's schedule.
For sure.
Work and everything tends to get in the way. So
we'll try not to let it get in too much of the way.
Yes. We'll try and be timely with it anyway. So, again, thank you for listening to this debut first episode of the Star Trek Spotlight, and you can contact us on Twitter. My Twitter handle is SCP21.
Mine is Optimus Solo.
So, thank you for joining us on M-Wire, and we'll see you soon.
You've just listened to Movie Week in Review on the Geekcast Radio Network. There are several ways to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show. First, visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on all our different podcasts. Second, you can rate our show and leave us feedback in iTunes. Third, follow us on Twitter at GCRN_MWire. Fourth, become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. Call the voicemail line, 502-526-5821. Please remember to tell us the show you are leaving the message for and your name. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.
In a world, there, I said it, happy